In March 2018, we opened our doors to the public with a vision not just to create challenging professional theatre, but to use this as a platform to inspire and bring communities together. Theatre and culture build identity. With theatre and culture in our local life, the community landscape is more vibrant. Local life is enriched. We believe that the benefits of theatre should be available for everyone. Our Theatre for All programme has removed financial barriers, giving disadvantaged people access to the theatre free of charge.
So we were told that we'd come here and have a Christmas meal and then go and watch A Christmas Carol.
Our aim is to make live professional theatre available to everyone and use that experience for positive change. Theatre can be transformational in young lives. Our academy is now in its 4th year, and we continue to build on our vision of bringing the best performing arts tuition to the heart of the Cotswolds. We work hard to make our academy as inclusive and as accessible as possible. Discounts apply for parents with more than one child. Our bursaries help support talented children from less affluent backgrounds. The Academy creates a fun and challenging environment where children can build friendships and develop key skills not just for theatre, but for life. We are also able to provide real opportunities for students who wish to pursue careers in the arts.
My name is Harry Apps. I am currently playing Marius in Les Miserables in the West End.
Barn outreach and learning programs engage with thousands of people. Our free workshops support the drama curriculum in local schools. Singing and musical theatre workshops in community groups and care homes have helped address issues of isolation. Our Song for Cirencester project in aid of mental health charities brought our community together in an unprecedented way. We've collaborated with many charities in the region, including the Churn Project, to support individuals dealing with the barriers to finding work.
Since working with UAN, my life's changed. It's given me some purpose, given me an interest, some confidence I was lacking prior to all this.
The Barn Theatre played a pivotal role in the town's 2018 World War I centenary celebrations. Who could forget our record-breaking Human Poppy? Our live streaming work on the annual Advent Festival helped thousands engage and take part in Cirencester's Christmas festivities. In these times of uncertainty, we strive to keep the community together. The theatre may be temporarily closed, but our commitment to you goes on. Even now, our amazing costume department are helping the NHS by making scrubs for frontline workers. We've used our technology to build a free live streaming service that provides much needed community news and entertainment for all the family, broadcasting every day to keep us all connected. We are not just a theatre. We are the Barn.
Wow, another great run in the bag this morning. It's the end of another week. How has that happened? God, it looks like I'm in a wind tunnel this morning, doesn't it? Where's the week gone? Love to know how the week was for you and what you have planned for the weekend. Can't believe it's the weekend already. God, I'm pumped. It's going to be such a good one despite the weather. Now, last night, cool conversations. Who saw the awesomeness that is Martin Hartley? Wasn't he great? Hit all of us up. Let us know what you thought of Martin. What a true legend. And so humble. So humble. Don't forget, if you didn't see it, you can catch up. I'll put the link in here. You can swipe up and you can get all that. But it is the weekend, and honestly, I'd love to know what you're up to this weekend. What's keeping your mojo high? Now remember, we're in this together, we'll get this done together. Oh yeah, steady 10k to take me into the week. Got to do something with this though. My hair, I think, is the longest it's ever been, and the amount of sweat that pours off me running is not nice or helpful at all. So suggestions welcome. Do I shave the whole thing off, or do I try to somehow, I don't know, take this out? I don't know. Anyway, suggestions welcomed. So what are you up to this week? How was your weekend? I think you all know by now that I always get really pumped by Mondays because of the opportunity and the excitement of what the week ahead holds. And this week is no different. That run set me up for today and hopefully will set me up for the rest of the week. So guys, have a good Monday. Remember, we're in it together. We'll get it done together. Whoopsie diddly dido. We all love that, don't we? Put a smile on your face on a Wednesday morning. I'm saying it today because once again I've lost my dog. He's in there somewhere playing hide and seek. Oh, he has completely gone actually. You can just see his head earlier. Oh, there he is. He's in there somewhere, just see him there. Oats, I can see you. Yeah, he's added an extra dimension to the runs these days. So how's the week going? What you been up to? Hit me up, let me know if you're having a good one. Oh, there he is. There he is again. Little tinker. And don't forget, tomorrow night, Thursday, Cool Conversations with the amazing Ben Saunders. So drop in and hear what he's got to say about life in general. We're in this together, we'll get it done eventually together. There he is, he's hiding. He forgets that he's got a tail. Silly dog. Here he comes. Come on, Oats. Well, you can't really see, but it's absolutely peeing down out there. And for once, my enthusiasm left me. I heard the rain beating down the roof this morning. I couldn't quite bring myself to go out for the run. But not to be defeated. Teamed up with the lovely Mrs. Cool, and we had a fantastic hit session followed by some boxing. And then I've just done the Joe Wicks workout with the children. So it may have not gone according to plan, but that's the important thing. Things don't always go according to plan, and it's the ability to adapt. And I felt that I definitely haven't missed out on my exercise this morning, even though I didn't get my run in. Now, today's Thursday. Don't forget, tonight, Cool Conversations. This week with Ben Saunders. Tell you what, it's going to be a good one. See you there. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us once again here at Cool Conversations in the Barn Theatre, Cirencester. For the second week running, we are lucky enough to have somebody here as a live guest in the theatre. Last week, of course, it was Martin Hartley, and we predominantly looked at the Arctic Ocean. This week, we have a man who specialises in both the Arctic and Arctic. This is a man that describes himself as somebody that's especially good at dragging heavy objects in cold places. He also happens to have the record for the longest uninterrupted human-powered journey of all time. Now, I could go on and on and on with his amazing achievements, but that one there, the longest ever uninterrupted human-powered journey, I think is staggering. So we're going to jump straight in this week with another friend of mine, another awesome legend, Ben Saunders. Ben, how are you, buddy?
Good, thanks, Kenton. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's fab. You've not been here before, have you?
I haven't. No, this is a great spot.
Because you relatively recently moved, back in December, January time, you moved into the area?
January last year. So we've been here, whatever it is, I lost track now, sort of 18 months now.
Oh, January last year?
Yeah.
Wow.
So loving it, yeah.
Well, you didn't call me up to say that we're neighbours now. I think you might have done, actually.
We are, but are you Gloucestershire as well? So
Yeah, I'm just up the road.
Same county, yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of right on the Gloucestershire, Oxfordshire border. But yeah, it's the same county.
No, I'm loving it.
Well, that's really good to hear. So, tell me, you love big, wide, open expanses of wilderness. How has lockdown been for you?
Yeah, I think this has been the longest period I've spent at home in the last 20 years, at least last 20 years. And I've actually quite enjoyed it. It's been nice. I've finally got to know my wife properly. And
that's a bold statement. You know, this does go out to the nation. In fact, it goes out globally. I suspect that Pip will be watching at some stage.
And
Glad I'm not in your shoes.
I've quite liked. I mean, in a weird way, my expeditions, they're these sort of paradoxes. Because if it's more than just me, and some of them have been just me, but if it's small team, 2 or 3, then yes, you're in these enormous expanses of genuine wilderness and nothingness. But half the time you're stuck in a tent that living in a space that it would be illegal to keep prisoners in. And my record is 108 nights in a tent with Tarka Le Piniere in Antarctica, 2013, 2014. So you kind of you learn a lot about coexisting trapped in a relatively small physical space. So there have been some useful lessons from that. You know, Tarka and I shared a pee bottle for 3.5 months in a tent.
Yeah, I've shared pee bottles, and it's that awkward moment, isn't it, about when you first bring up well, why don't we share the pee bottle and save weight and save space?
Exactly.
You've got to know somebody quite.
And then who gets to carry it or drag it in our case?
Yeah.
There's
I've done a lot of climbing
around. Yeah.
I've done a lot of climbing with Ian Parnell, who's arguably the world's most clumsiest climbing partner, and there's all sorts of bad stories about pee bottles with that man. So your longest journey that was in Antarctica.
That was Antarctica.
As I said in the intro, we had Martin, who you know really well. I know really well, and he was talking a lot about the Arctic Ocean. Your longest, I'm right in that accolade, is the longest human-powered...
longest human-powered polar journey, longest polar journey on foot. So yeah, so I'm sure there probably have been longer ones in more temperate climates, but yeah, we did the longest ever polar journey on foot. So it was, well, the fun thing was the GPS at the end of the journey, I can't actually remember the number, we were using kilometres on the trip, but it was 1,795 statute miles. So I was like, oh, that's the distance we've covered. I had an email from a guy who specialises in GPS and GIS and all that kind of mapping technology. And he said, well, you realise that number's probably wrong. I was like, well, what do you mean? We're like tracking the whole route on GPS. He said, well, GPS assumes that the Earth is a perfect sphere, which apparently it's not. It's squashed a bit at the bottom. So he reckoned we'd actually walk 6 miles further, which I was chuffed about. So 1,801 statute miles. Either way, nearly 2,900 k. It was a long old camping trip. 108 nights. We had 3 rest days in 108 days, basically, and they were only rest days because the weather was too grim or too dangerous to move. So they weren't particularly restful. Tough trip.
Yeah, because the Earth is like a squash, well, not more like a donut, but that's why Chimborazo, which is pretty much on the equator, is the furthest spot on the planet away from the Earth's core. You might think it's Everest, but because of the position of Everest on the Earth's core. So yeah, it's squashed across the equator. So why? It always comes back to these things. Why the poles?
Gosh.
Or why polar regions? I know you've done quite a lot.
Why polar
regions?
Well. I never expected this was ever going to become a career. Like no one had ever suggested that was an option when I was a kid. And do
you call it a career?
Strangely, yeah. I'm quite envious of people like you actually. If you're a mountaineer, that's like, oh, okay. But if you do polar expeditions, well, I don't like explorer. It sort of sounds a bit grand. I definitely don't like adventurer. There isn't really a long distance skier. There isn't a sort of catchy
extreme walker
title. Exactly, yeah, extreme
sledge puller,
sledge dragger. Yeah. So I kind of wish there was like, oh yeah, I'm a yachtsman. I'm a mountaineer. I lead. I always say that I lead expeditions, and then people say, well, who do you lead? I say, well, a lot of solo actually. Yeah. So, but where did it come from? I think the screws started coming loose when I was 18, 19. I was working right up in the northwest corner of the Scottish Highlands.
The John Ridgway.
John Ridgway, exactly. Yeah. So this should have been my gap year, and I'm still on it now, age 42. So I never made it to university after that. But I spent a year, or nearly a year, 9-10 months, working for John up in Scotland at the John Ridgway School of Adventure, which I'd read about in one of his books, or a couple of his books, and then Channel 4 made a documentary about the place at some point, probably mid-90s, so I was still at school. And something about it really impressed me, and he struck me as this larger-than-life sort of superhero character. So I remember thinking, oh, this is cool, I'd love to go. And I noticed that he was doing these sort of, it was like Outward Bound on steroids, this incredible school, middle of nowhere, up in the Highlands, for week-long courses for corporate clients. And I noticed on this documentary that most of his instructors seemed quite young. They were probably late teens, early 20s. So my brother and I, my brother's a couple of years younger than me, but we both decided that'd be a cool thing to go and do one day. So and I can't remember if it was my brother or if I did it, but this was pre-internet. So we went to the library in Canterbury in Kent and found like the yellow pages or the phone book for Highlands and Islands, found John Ridgway. Like I don't know if we called or wrote him a letter, but I sort of basically applied for a job. I was totally winging it. I had some really, really basic, I could tie a few knots and knew which way around of a sailing dinghy was, but I wasn't a highly qualified instructor. And yeah, to my amazement, I was offered a job there for hilariously the lowest salary I've ever been paid for anything. He's since the school opened in the 1970s, he pays his instructors £5 a week. So that's what I got. £5 a week was my salary. I still saved loads because we didn't have any. There was nowhere to spend money out there. So I got paid £5 a week for about 10 months, and it was just epic year. It's right up in Sutherland, so you've got these amazing mountains on the doorstep. The school's on the shore of this incredible sea loch, and we were outdoors every day. And if we weren't in the mountains or sailing or sea kayaking, I was reading books. And John had the most amazing book collection. And the books that really, really gripped me more than anything were the polar stuff. Kind of followed shortly by mountaineering, and I loved all the kind of Bonington, kind of Doug Scott, all those sort of that kind of era. I loved that, but I really loved the Edwardian stuff. Scott Shackleton, get the name right. Scott Shackleton, Amundsen, Nansen, the kind of Edwardian pioneers, and I loved the sort of Ran Fiennes, Robert Swan, Mike Stroud, that kind of era. So the more contemporary British polar stuff, and there'd always been this kind of peculiar, like for a small island nation, this incredible. Britain's got this amazing polar heritage, probably matched only by Norway, and most people say eclipsed by Norway. But like we're both small countries, but we've got this incredible history and heritage with these amazing places at the sort of far north, far south.
Why do you think? It's the same in mountaineering. Why do you think that is? In mountaineering, the UK has generally punched above its weight. Yeah. Same with the polar exploration, but we don't really have any snow and ice as such in either of those sports.
It's a weird one. I mean, I'm sure, I'm not a historian, but I'm sure kind of in the midst of time, there's probably some sort of colonial link to British kind of conquering the world. But even when you look at the 1950s, like we had real pioneers in climbing, and in polar terms, we had Wally Herbert, who was doing absolutely groundbreaking stuff a bit later than that. So there's this amazing heritage, and it really inspired me as a kid, as a teenager, and I think it was one of those books. It was probably Rand Fine's Mike Stroud, and the book is called, is it Mind Ever Matter? About their Antarctic crossing?
Yeah, Mind Ever Matter is definitely one of Rand's books, whether it's co-authored by Mike.
I think that was Rand's, and then Mike had to. He wasn't allowed to publish his book for like another year afterwards.
Well, yeah, that's a very Rand thing to do.
There was some agreement.
He's got quite tight.
I think it was kind of reading that aged, whatever it was, 18, 19. I was like, oh, that sounds awesome. And it's weird because I reread the book a few years ago, and now I'm like, oh, they really suffered like dogs. That sounds hellish. God, they did a lot of things like I would have done that differently. But there was something about those stories that really inspired me. And I loved being outdoors. I did a tiny bit of climbing in my teens, but never got any better at that. And I guess I always dreamt of doing one big trip one day. So I thought that's what I'd do. I never imagined I'd do 12 big expeditions.
Well, I was going to say, you've done numerous ones now, going back. I mean, your first one, which, your first polar trip, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, 2001 with Penn Haddo.
2001.
And it was an attempt of an unsupported trip to the North Pole, which you had to cut short because of the breakup of the ice.
Yeah, we basically ran out of time on that first trip. There's a very definite window. Obviously, North Pole, you're walking over the sea. You're walking over sea ice. There is no land up there. It's 5.4 million square miles of ocean, so it's a huge area. It's bigger than the US. And there are no maps, therefore. You're travelling over this weird kind of surface, pack ice that is not only floating, but it's moving around the whole time. So it's this sort of really fluid environment that's in this constant state of flux. And it's totally unique. And I went on that trip with Penn. I was 23. I thought I was pretty fit and hard and tough and knew what I was doing. I'd had a brief army career before that. I'd spent, snow holes in Norway and ski touring, and you thought I knew what I was doing. And it was such a shock, like how tough it was, especially early on, because you sort of start early in the spring when it's just getting light, and then you're kind of racing the changing seasons to sort of get to the pole before it gets too warm and everything melts. And the season is kind of getting shorter every year. The ice is getting thinner, temperatures are rising, so it's an expedition that's sort of getting harder every single year. And yeah, it's such a unique environment.
So how did that work with Penn? Because Penn's a very established, and I think he was at the time.
Yeah.
A very established, and again, I'm not entirely sure, but I think he is more focused on the Arctic than the Antarctic. Where did the hookup come from? If he was so
Penn
established,
Penn had a company sort of late 90s, early 2000s that was about a decade before its time. It was called the Polar Travel Company, and he had. This must have been 99 or 2000. It was back when like the internet was just becoming a sort of thing for everyone. But it was still a novelty, and I remember Penn had a website for this business, and I emailed him, and he was advertising. I think the cheapest trip they were doing was you could join a team to do it was a 2-week expedition to the magnetic North Pole, so north coast of Canada basically. And I thought, well, that sounds awesome. It's like a little apprenticeship. I'd love to do that, and it was still a chunky sum of money. It was still sort of 16 grand or something you had to raise to do it. So I was like, well, I had no money. So I was like, well, I'll figure that out, but I'd love to join the team. And Penn said, great, we've got a team, there's room for you if you want to do it. He was living on the edge of Dartmoor at the time. So he's like, tell you what, if you can get the train down here or drive down here, come and stay with me for a weekend, and we'll do a little hike over the moors and see how you get on and see how we get on, and then I'll decide if you can join the team. So I went down there, and we got on really well, and we spent a couple of days getting cold and wet and tired on the moors, and I'm quite good at suffering, so I think he realised I could hack a walk over the moors, and he then said, and I forget the exact timeline, but he then said actually the team was going to go to the geographic North Pole, proper North Pole from Russia, rather than just a magnetic North Pole trip. So it was a bit more money, but he was convinced I could do it. I was like, oh, fantastic, great, and I was like, oh, I've got to raise more money. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And then, it's all a bit hazy in my area, but at some point, the team basically vanished. And I don't know if their sponsor pulled out or went bust or something happened.
So there was actually a team.
There was a team, but the team decided they couldn't do it. And then, so Penn had already paid deposits with people chartering helicopters in Siberia. So he wasn't going to see that money back. So Penn was like, right, Ben, how about we do it together? We won't have, the original plan, I think, was to have 2 resupplies. He said, we'll do no resupplies, unsupported, we'll pull everything. We'll be the first British team. You'll be the youngest, you're 23, it'll be awesome. I was like, fantastic. He said, you've only got to raise another, and I forget what it was, but the grand total was having to raise about 50 grand. I don't think I quite managed to raise it all, and we left on a shoestring budget, and it was this extraordinary kind of baptism. Like it was a tough trip, but he was an amazing mentor. Like I learned a lot from him, and he was so. He's a bit like Martin Hartley. Like he's sort of Martin, bless him, a really good friend. Like in the real world, completely disorganised.
Get him
we
had
Arctic.
him here only last week, and he's all over the place. I was surprised he actually turned up here, to be frank.
Get him into the polar regions, and where most people go to pieces, and they're just on it, and they're kind of in their element and relaxed and at home. And Penn was the same, and we, sleeping in a tent on pack ice. It's all breaking up and shifting around. You're looking out for polar bears. There are early on the first couple of weeks bear prints around the tent when you wake up in the morning. It's a sketchy, scary place, and yet Penn was just in his element, and I kind of fed off that. So he was a brilliant mentor and brilliant sort of leader of that first trip with two of us, and it was a steep learning curve for me, and we didn't make it. We got 2/3 of the way there.
Yeah, it was.
So,
I was reading the pack ice all broke up. So it's really interesting because clearly back in the day, the Scots, the Amazons, the Shackletons, they would have to overwinter before they would attempt their journeys. Does modern technology mean that's negated these days, or do teams still overwinter?
We're lucky enough to fly in, obviously, so that kind of negates it, and it means we can get in sort of early in the season. The challenge for those guys 100 years ago was they had to sail down there, and if you get down at the start of the season, there's tons of sea ice, so they had to sail in like late summer the year before, build a hut, spend the winter in the hut, 25 darkness, and then get up next spring, do the trip. I don't know, even if we wanted to, I'm not convinced it would have been legal. I don't think we could have got a permit for that.
Oh, really? So you would have to overwinter at one of the scientific bases?
They probably wouldn't let you either. I was amazed. I had a virtual Zoom beer last night with a few mates, and Steve Jones was on the call.
Was the beer real, though?
The beer was real. But
what is the beer of choice of a Arctic explorer?
Well, I think there's some good local brews, actually.
Yeah, there are, actually.
Yeah, I've been getting really into, I'm trying to think how local it is. I think they're Wye Valley, but there's one called, it's called Butty Back.
Yeah.
Which I love that. Which apparently is Welsh for little friend or something. But that's more.
I'm with you on that one. And Bath Ales do some good beer.
Yeah, it's good.
They
beer.
do some really good.
And I told lockdown, my alcohol consumption has gone through the roof, and I've got into drinking whiskey. I never did that before. So.
No, that gives me a bad head. You must have one of those. They were doing like a campaign a couple of years ago. The Shackleton whiskey is a blend. So you should hook up with Sean. Sean Conway is quite keen on his. It's really interesting because the only sponsorship deal that I've turned down that I actually regret, and it was Jazz, my wife, essentially turned it down for me. Well, it was a potential deal with one of Cornish brewers.
Yeah.
Oh God, the name eludes me. The guys that do Doombar.
Yes, I know who you mean.
Oh God, it's really bad because I really like Doombar and Atlantic Ale. Anyway, Jazz said no, you can't do it, and to this day I regret it. I love beer.
We years and years ago, Guinness launched Guinness Extra Cold, and all their adverts had giant billboards. It's like a pint of Guinness with an igloo on top or an ice axe in it. I was like, this is perfect. I was looking for like giant sums of money to go to Antarctica. So we started talking to Diageo, and they were really keen. And then at some point, I think they realised that I was doing talks to schools, and they were like, oh no, we can't possibly be in.
Oh really?
So that all fell through. But yeah,
because you also associated with Lego for a while, weren't they? They launched their Arctic range.
Lego Arctic. That was probably my coolest little. It was a very short-lived little gig, but that was fun. Although I did some video for them. Hilariously, I think it only went out on like Cartoon Network or something. But me and my like polar gear, a big jacket on, in a studio, sweating my nuts off, like with all this cool Lego. And I got all the whole set. That's the best.
You still got it?
That's the best thing. The whole deal. Yeah. I can't remember the other terms.
No, you haven't got. I know you haven't got children yet. So you don't really realise how obnoxious Lego is at 2 o'clock in the morning when you step on when you're off to the loo or something like that, and you step on this little piece of Lego. I'm sure that those guys over there deliberately make Lego to be as painful as possible at 2 o'clock in the morning. But That's probably the thing I am most jealous of all my contemporaries of. The fact that you launched a whole range of Lego, the Arctic Lego range.
That was a lot of fun.
That's pretty cool. Now, I've completely lost my train of thought. Where were we? We were talking about... there we go. So one of the questions I was really curious about was, you got the bases down there, and I don't know how many people are down there on a permanent basis, but the main base is the American one at the pole. Because you talk, I saw it somewhere whereby you were saying, sorry guys, we already talked about this. I've completely lost my train of thought.
No, I think we lost the bit about the pole. That got cut. So we can talk about pole again if you want.
Can we talk about the pole? Okay, so when Ben got to the North Pole, there was nothing there. Did we capture that bit, or did the card run out?
Earlier. But what we lost...
That was earlier, was it, Howie?
I think we lost me talking about the South Pole and all the buildings and stuff there. I think that got lost.
Because I want to go back to the psychology of walking away. All right, okay, but don't worry.
Yes, if there's anything you're unsure of, you can always be like...
All right, well, we can always cut it, or we can tee it up, or something like that. All right, okay, so I just take... So sorry, Ben, I'm making your editing a little bit harder. So something I was really interested in is, obviously, one of the differences between North Pole, South Pole, and I read somewhere, and I love this, when you finally got to the North Pole, you were surprised that there was nothing there at all. Despite the fact that you knew there was nothing there, you were still dumbfounded. There wasn't even a pole at the pole.
It is ultimate anticlimax. Like it's just number on the GPS. Like it's a bit of snow, a bit of ice, like every other bit of ice.
I love that you already knew and you're still disappointed. I think that's sort of how little brain cells we have. Yeah. But the South Pole is obviously very different. There's a permanent American base down there with a couple of 300 people permanently based there.
Big American. I mean, essentially, it's a research station. But one of the things that surprised me about Antarctica is for every scientist working down there are several support staff. Like, it's a huge logistical operation. It might as well be a space station, like the base at the South Pole. It is probably the most challenging place for people to live year-round on the planet. 24-hour darkness in the winter, ambient temperatures -60 odd some days. So it's a bonkers place to try and live and exist and work. And there's this really complex, elaborate logistics network around keeping human beings alive there all year round. So it's a real, when you get there, especially if you've walked there over weeks and weeks and weeks through weeks of absolute nothingness. It's a real shock to see sort of buildings on the horizon, and then you hear vehicles and engines and reversing beepers and trucks and forklifts and skidoos and things buzzing. It's a busy little place, and Tark and I decided we realised, I think even before we flew to Antarctica, that this was going to be a really critical moment, because it was a very obvious and sensible and easy place to quit. They've got central heating, they've got a cafe, they've got tourist shop, they've got
they've got a tourist shop,
aircraft going in.
You've got like a bumper sticker for your car.
Someone said to me years ago, they're like, "Oh, you've got to try the cinnamon buns when you get there. Amazing, like fresh baked every day." And I was like, "Oh, this is way too tempting." So we kind of decided. At that point, we were still adamant this whole thing was going to be completely unsupported, like dragging everything ourselves whole way, no assistance. So we thought that having a kind of cappuccino and a cinnamon roll was going to be would compromise that. We were also worried about getting ill. We hadn't seen human beings for 61 days, I think, when we got there, and we were pretty knackered. So we were sort of worried about picking up a virus or something. So we decided we were going to just turn around and get away again as soon as we could, and we weren't going to visit the buildings. We were invited. The NSF, the US government, said that you'd be guests of honour, welcome to visit, have a tour of the base.
But how would that, even if you took no assistance, how would that work?
Yeah, I don't know. We just
unassisted
decided. We decided we just weren't. We just wanted to get away again, and we were kind of really up against the clock the whole time of that trip. So then we also decided a week or two out from the pole that actually we were going to leave the tent up, leave the sledges, leave most of our gear, and literally set off just with these like summit packs, like super light rucksacks we've been carrying with us, and just bag the pole in a day. And it actually turned into a pretty epic day, because once you get close to the pole, there are places you can't go. There are certain areas where they're doing experiments, so these clean air sectors, you have to steer around those. You get close to the runway, it's a working runway, they've got aircraft and things taxiing around, you've got to navigate around that and around all the buildings. So actually what in a straight line looked like a relatively simple, relatively easy day's walk there and back, actually we ended up doing these sort of multiple dog legs. So what should have been 30 or 40k in a day, we did 56 kilometres. So it's had this sort of huge, epic day.
And that's, I mean, you're already 61 days into it, so you're tired, you're drained.
We'd done whatever we'd done by then, 9.
And you still did 56k in a day.
Yeah. And I think actually that was the start of a bit of a downward spiral physically, because we got back to the tent at about 1 or 2 in the morning, I think, and had our melted snow, had our sort of eve meal. And we were trying to decide whether to have a lie-in the next day or whether to get up at the normal, like 6 a.m. when the alarm went off and get going. So we kind of decided, no, let's stay in the routine, let's get up early and just crack another day out. And so we slept for a couple of hours and got up and did another huge day. And that was the start. I mean, I think we were already pretty knackered by then, but it really kind of spiraled after that. We were just exhausted. But yeah, it was a weird feeling. Like it wasn't a feeling of success or elation, because the South Pole was never the goal. That was just halfway.
Yeah. I mean, it's exactly the same with mountaineering. Getting to the top is optional, but getting back down is mandatory. Yeah. And I know you relatively well, and know the determination that you have there, and to only reach halfway. The expedition goal was to, in the best possible way, recreate Scott's footsteps of going there and back. So
I also thought at that point that we'd done the hardest part. Like, we were going back to the coast, literally downhill for some parts of it. It theoretically should have had the wind behind us, because we've been going into headwind for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yeah, we both do quite a lot of cycling. We both know that the wind is never with you. It doesn't matter how hard you cycle one way, turn around.
2 days later, wind turned around, like everything was really grim. So what I was expecting to be like the easiest bit of the whole trip, on the plateau, yes, we're at altitude, we're nearly 3,000 metres, but the sledges were almost empty, because we'd literally buried 10 caches of food on the way out. So all we had to do to get back was to retrace our steps. And for a few days, we literally could see our ski tracks, and then they all got blown away and couldn't see it. And you're back on a compass bearing and GPS again. But we literally had to just link up these caches, these depots on the way back to the coast. So we knew the sledges were never going to be heavy again. We dragged all the weight from the coast and gradually dumped the depots on the way out. So I sort of thought it was going to be a lot easier on the way back, and that actually was not the case. I mean, our speed went up, our average distance went up massively, but it was still incredibly hard.
So there's a couple of things I want to try to dive into there. One is, how does it feel psychologically turning your back on the pole? You get there and there's all that opulence there. You've got an invite, open arms, come and have your cinema, and you've got to turn your back on that, and you've got another 50 days. I don't know how long the return leg was going to be.
Something like that, yeah.
50 days back of hardship. Yeah. Psychologically, that must be a huge thing to try
I remember mentally thinking, right, we're over halfway now. that was a big thing. Like, it's like, okay, we're on the sort of home stretch.
And is that, because I was following quite intently, and you said that was, you were expecting it to be easier and the mileage went up, but in actual fact it wasn't. Was that, because I know there was some physicality in that, but was that also potentially sort of mentally thinking it should be easier and it wasn't? I mean, was there a slight chink in the Saunders? Because mentally, I know you're like iron. I mean, was it a slight chink? I mean, I don't know. I'm just really curious.
It's interesting. I'm like, Tark and I were a really good team on that trip, and we both pulled each other through some low points, physically, mentally, and yes, like neither of us would have had a chance if we weren't able to to push ourselves and to work hard and motivate ourselves. But that motivation kind of waxes and wanes, and I definitely. I mean, we had the real crux of the whole trip was about a week, 8 days after the pole, when we had to get more food flown out, and that felt like failure at the time. Basically, we'd obviously left these 10 depots on the way out. We'd left the last depot quite a long way from the pole, thinking, well, we'll be on a roll. It'll be midsummer. It was exactly midsummer, so we should have had the best weather. The conditions on the plateau aren't too bad normally, so we thought it'll be good surface. We'll make loads of progress. The sledges will be empty. We'll be flying along, and actually the weather was miserable. We were probably more physically tired than I was expecting. It's hard to say looking back, but we realised very quickly. And the whole thing, in a way, is a sort of calculation running the whole time of like distance covered versus food remaining and hours you've got left. And we kind of realised when we thought we'd be gunning it back to the coast again, we were going slower than we'd expected to, and therefore we were going to run out of food days before we reached our first depot. So we're like, okay, we've got X number of days food in the sledges. Let's halve it. Let's just do half rations to get to the first depot, and then we'll be slightly lower elevation. It'll all get better as we get close to the coast. So we did several days. I forget if it was 6, 7, 8 days. It's all a bit of a blur on half rations, which was miserable.
And half rations, I mean, how many calories?
Yeah, so a full day for us was about 6,000 calories. So we were suddenly eating 3,000 calories a day and doing 10 hours.
Which sounds like a lot.
Sounds like a lot normally, but yeah, 10 hours of exercise at minus 40, and yeah.
I remember we both know Sir Ranulph Fiennes pretty well, and he spent years with me in the mountains, and we were talking about nutrition in the poles. And he was saying, yeah, Mike Stroud, he spent years and years and years like researching the best possible, most nutritious, like energy efficient food known to mankind. I'm like, oh wow, what was it? And there's a big pause. He goes, butter. Like, what? He goes, yes, butter. We put butter in everything. You got soup, butter. Like pasta, butter. Spaghetti, butter. Like, wow, and it took like months, years of research to come to butter, because that's essentially what they were doing back in the day, wasn't it?
Yeah. We were a little bit more high tech. We had like the evening meals had we used. A few years ago, we found something called anhydrous milk fat, which was an ingredient that like
sounds awful.
People were using to make cakes and things. It's basically butter with the water removed. So we're like, oh, perfect. We can make water from snow. So if we're not dragging water, that's a winner. So we started using that, and then someone pointed out that in Indian cooking, there's something called ghee, which is exactly the same thing. So our evening meals on that Scottish expedition had ghee in them, and then they were kind of freeze dried together. So
you're actually trying to tell me you ate curry all the way to the pole and back?
There was a lot of curry, yeah. I would totally do the same again. Curry is like perfect polar meal. But yeah, but we basically ran out of food. We got to this point where it was really cold, really windy, really grim. I'd physically had some problems, but strangely, I had a few days of going really well, and to my surprise, Tarka started struggling, and part of that might be physiological. We were roughly the same age. He's a few months younger than me, but we both rocked up, fit, well prepared, strong. But he's much taller than I am. I'm obviously a short ass, and he's sort of lanky, and I think. And we were similar weights when we started, like both 90-something kilos. We both deliberately sort of beefed up, and I think there's something in having more surface area, being whatever he is, 4 or 5 inches taller than me. There's just more of him to radiate heat away, and I think being compact actually is an advantage in those environments. So for whatever reason, Tarka was sort of struggling for those few days more than I was, and basically went down with hypothermia, and I was so knackered and so out myself that I didn't really recognise it until it was slightly too late. And by the end of that day, I was leading for the last hour or so, probably last 90 minutes. We normally took it in turns, but Tark was really struggling, so I was like, I'm just going to crack on and then put the tent up, and he can come and I'll make him a hot drink, and he can come and get a sleeping bag. And by the time he got to me, I'd put the tent up. He was totally out of it, and when he finally got the tent, got undressed, both his thumbs were. I still don't know if it's full-blown frostbite or just bad frost nip, but they were not in a good way. And I remember feeling really scared, really angry with myself, because this whole thing was my idea, and I'd got us both into this sort of trouble. And kind of realising, I think even at that point, like, okay, I can't remember the exact distances. The depot, our first depot, was something like 50k away. We had half a day's food left. The weather was still really bad. Tarka had been genuinely hypothermic. I was like, okay, the challenge for me always has been like navigating that line between being whatever you want to call it, kind of progressive, bold, courageous, whatever, innovative, and being reckless.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, we're on the wrong side of this boundary now. This is getting a bit too dangerous. And I thought, well, I've got potentially 3 options here. We can either head out tomorrow into this storm with half a day's rations, probably a day and a half, 2 days worth of travel to do, and somehow hope that we get lucky. We can quit, we can call for an evacuation and give up. Or maybe, and we hadn't really planned this in advance, but maybe we can get ALE's Twin Otter that would pick us up in an emergency. Maybe we can get them to fly us out some more food. So that's essentially what we did. We had another week's worth of rations dropped off. And it felt at the time, I mean, that's one of the toughest decisions I've ever had to make. And it felt on that day like absolute failure. We'd come so close to like the ultimate expedition I could think of. Like it was the biggest thing I could aspire to in my world. And we were so close to doing it flawlessly. And here we were getting a resupply of food, which meant we were no longer a, whatever you want to call it,
unsupported or whatever.
Strangely looking back, one of the proudest decisions of my life. And I think it's when I probably sort of matured a bit as a leader, because I was ultimately in charge of this thing and got my priorities straight. And I thought I'd get more sort of flack for that decision, for sort of asking for help. But actually we didn't.
Well, it's a really interesting one. It was Shackleton's wife, and you know this way better than I do. In the same way that I know my mountaineering history, I know you know your polar history. It was Shackleton's wife who berated him a little bit. what are you, a donkey?
Oh yeah, well, I think he wrote to her and said, I thought you'd prefer a live donkey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, better a live donkey than a dead lion.
Yeah.
Which it's, and that's exactly that. Getting to the top is optional, getting back down is mandatory. Yeah. And it sort of links back into what we were saying earlier about Mike Stroud. It makes our suffering completely optional. And it is that super fascinating conundrum that most modern day explorers, adventurers find themselves in. Look at, his name's going to elude me now, the guy that sort of went missing down in Papua.
Oh, yes.
And he's like, no, I wasn't missing. I was kind of hanging out with the tribes people. Well, why didn't you have a satellite device? Well, why should I? And it's that really interesting situation that we find ourselves in through modern day exploring, exploration.
I heard a great story recently. It was a couple who, I think they just got married, and they were doing one of the big long-distance trails in North America. It might be in the Pacific Coast Trail, which is a few weeks, I think. Yeah. And they, for some reason, maybe they didn't have a smartphone with them or something, but they just weren't reading the news. They just weren't in touch with, and they were just doing this walk, and I think camping out bits of it. And they finally got to a town and just rocked up with their backpacks and their tent and things, and I think lockdown had happened. And they were
wow!
They were like, "Where have you come from?" Like, it was a really cool story.
And could they get out of town, or were they sort of stuck in town?
What happened off that?
It's like you've got to get out of Dodge now.
But it was just a really cool interview. People that just had no idea what was going on, no idea there was a global pandemic. They're just completely disconnected.
And it's one of those sort of fascinating situations because I don't think it takes away anything from the level of achievement, because I think what you and Taka did is mesmerising. It really is. But the psychological impact that it potentially has, that there is that button, simplifying it, there's a button that you can press, and to a certain extent, international rescue will come and get you, or attempt to come and get you. That's not a psychological, I call it a crutch, but it's a inhibitor or whatever, that the previous generation, they never had that issue. It was, okay, we've got to do this, so we've got to be focused on this, whereas we have that slight... It's a funny one.
I think people often assume that having, in my case, a satellite phone, like the ability to communicate, assume that makes things easier, and I'm not convinced that's the case. I think it's in some ways it's great sometimes to be able to talk to people you care about and you miss and everything else, and to sort of tell them that you're okay and things are going fine and have a chat. And I genuinely really enjoy the ability to sort of share the story of what I'm doing. And Antarctica is still limited because there's probably less. I don't know. Have you? Is there 4G now on Everest, or 3G at least?
Yeah, well, we have a Wi-Fi network at base camp. Yeah. I did send a 3G enabled tweet back in 2011 or something like that. But high on the mountain, the only way you can connect high on the mountain really is satellite device.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're stuck with Iridium, which is that's the only.
So it's the only global one, isn't it? Yeah. We generally use Soraya,
yeah,
but.
Yeah. So Iridium is good for voice calls, but it's rubbish for data. And I remember like 2003, I sent back from a North Pole trip. I'd send back tiny little grainy thumbnail photographs and a little bit of text, and people thought that was amazing. And nowadays, there's a kind of expectation that we, even with Chark and me in 2013, people were like, "Oh, can you do like live Skype calls and video chat?" And we're like, no, we can't. We've got this tiny bandwidth connection. We can maybe send a photo back every day, compressed, but that's it.
But then psychologically, it's really hard. So I genuinely, even on an Everest trip, which is nowhere near as out there as some of your big polar trips, if I speak to the family, if I speak to the children, it leaves me emotionally quite vulnerable afterwards. It really takes the focus away from the moment to somewhere else, and for me at least, I don't think that's a positive thing for myself. And I can imagine in that situation it could be downright dangerous.
Yeah, I've got friends in the military, and some of them have done multiple tours of Afghanistan, and more than one of them have said that they prefer to say goodbye to the family at the airport,
and that's it,
and not talk when they're out there, because it kind of makes the sort of homesickness too much to bear. So. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah. Now, we touched upon ALE earlier, and they are pretty much the only big logistical outfit down there. If you want to go down and do something, generally you've got to use ALE. And we're just going to touch upon it just a little bit, if you're cool with it. Mountaineering is pretty much open to everybody. There's no rules, regulations. It's a fairly cool community. Looking from the outside in, the polar community, it seems to be a minefield of kind of rules and regulations, which some people think are, like using a kite, for instance. Some people say, well, that's not human-powered, that's wind-powered, or whatever. And those rules and regulations seem to be laid down by ALE.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is there's no governing body for.
Oh, is there not? There's
nothing. There's no agreed set of standards, and we were chatting earlier about Explorers Web, and they put a sort of a set of rules up years and years and years ago, but what they weren't transparent about were the founders of Explorers Web were a couple who'd been to both poles.
Yeah, it's Tina and
Tom and Tina.
Tom and Tina.
Yeah, and I think they've sold it now. I don't know what they're doing, but in a way,
they could be quite nasty in some of their.
Yeah, we had a few run-ins over the years. I used to get really wound up about this stuff, and I think I'm just mellowing in my.
I was going to say it's old age, or maybe it's too much whiskey. I don't know, or not enough.
But I used, and in some ways, it probably from the outside, it does just all look like sort of semantics and what they were arguing about, and part of the challenge for me in Antarctica was trying to prove that actually it hadn't all been done. There was this kind of misconception. People were like, oh, didn't Ben Fogle do that last year? Or hasn't Prince Harry just been to the South Pole? Or didn't the Blue Peter presenter do it on a bike recently? Or so there was this kind of misconception that it had all been done before. So one of the challenges we had was saying, no, actually, this to me, this iconic journey, like defeated Shackleton, killed Scott, no one's done it yet. Like that to me there was something remarkable about that, and a lot of people didn't really realise. But yeah, it's a weird world, and there's a lot of sort of backstabbing and sort of people slagging each other off, and to a certain degree it is sort of semantics. Even when Explorers Web put up their rules, it was kind of through the lens of Tom and Tina's achievements. So they were like, well, North Pole trip only counts if you start from land, but their South Pole trip started from Hercules Inlet, which is like hundreds of miles away from the actual sea. If you're looking at, well, Shackleton, Scott had to Amundsen, had to sail down there. Hercules wasn't a start point that was accessible to them. Like they would have started 150 miles out, whatever it is. So.
I mean, we're not going to labour the point, but I listened to a podcast recently about Colin O'Brady, who did the first unsupported crossing of the continent. Yeah. Which, when I first looked at it, that starts and finishes a long way from the sea.
Miles from the sea, yeah.
But the continent is the land mass.
Yeah, if you kind of melt all the ice away, it's like where the rock...
Where the rock would start.
There's sort of two short.
But he was actually very complimentary. He mentions you a number of times, and he's very, very complimentary about your achievements.
Yeah, I've not met him. It's interesting. Like he got a real roasting in Nat Geo.
In Nat Geo, yeah.
And part of me thinks, it's a world that I've been really engaged with for nearly 20 years now, politicians, and part of me has always felt that I've had to, I don't know, kind of have this real respect for even the sort of contemporary pioneers, and for me it was, as I got into it, it was actually the Norwegians, people like Borge Ausland, who's like the
he's like a god
of the.
I mean, what he did recently with
Mike Horn.
Mike Horn. I mean, if the viewers or the listeners haven't listened to it, I mean, Mike Horn is trying to circumnavigate the world, or it's something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, he's done all sorts
and then he teamed up and went across the North Pole in winter.
They did a North Pole trip together in winter from Russia, and then they went back out. And
from a non-polar man, that sounded.
Oh, it's nuts. Yeah, it's
properly like on the edge, hardcore.
Sufferfest.
And they kind of got. Did they get rescued? I don't quite know. Icebreaker had to come and get them, and it was touch and go. It was.
Yeah. Team had to ski out and meet them and bring them all back.
I mean, surely Borge Ausland Ran always used to call him like the Norwegian enemy. Yeah. But he's got to be one of the top.
Yeah, and I from that first expedition with Penn in 2001, he was actually, we basically shared flights with him out to the start point, and we spent several nights in a hotel in Russia.
I mean, I've heard he's a really nice guy.
And he's so nice, and his achievements
are astonishing.
It was mad for me. It almost felt like I was sort of getting ready for like a Formula One race, and here I was like sharing a hotel with Michael Schumacher, and I'd never actually driven the car yet. Like I was so out of my depth on that first trip. But he was super kind to me, and then a few years later, 2003, I think 2004, I went to go and stay with him in Norway. Like he sort of took me under his belt and was super generous. When I started looking at Antarctica, he had some amazing satellite imagery, that kind of thing. So he was super good to me. And so I've always felt it was kind of important to sort of pay my dues to like the real pioneers. And Colin kind of came from nowhere, and he's obviously brilliant at PR and publicity, and got a ton of press and ton.
Absolutely.
And I think that in itself probably wound a few of the old guard up.
Well, it's the same in the mountaineering world. I mean, a lot of people look at Bear and go, "Well, Bear's just a fraud." I look at Bear and go, "Well, he's a genius of what he does and what he's done in terms of marketing and getting the next generation outside and pumped up and amped up." I don't see it as a negative at all. I see it as a positive. And I think to a certain extent, without getting into the details of polar world, what's right, what's wrong, Colin O'Brady, he did the same with mountaineering with the Adventurers Grand Slam, the 7 summits, North Pole, South Pole. He kind of elevated it and brought it into the public persona, which I think can only be a good thing for the genre of activity.
I think 10 years ago I would have got really wound up about it, but nowadays I'm just.
Yeah, it's your old age, Ben. You're trying to catch up with me, and it was. I've got to.
I got to hang out in Antarctica end of last year, beginning of this year, with one of the guides, one of the mountain guides down there, is Aleš Sezen, who is a Slovenian bit of a legend. So he did North Face of Latok.
Oh yeah. So he's. I'm trying to think who his father is. His father was.
He's devil climate, yeah.
Yeah, it got a little bit controversial. North face of Yanu, south face of Lhotse. He's Sesson. I can't think what it was. Anyway, his father is like a legend.
He's a super cool guy and like proper Slovenian kind of hard man. And we were talking about Nim's project. And he was like, well. He said to me that was a really impressive logistical operation.
And an endurance one as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But from a climbing perspective...
From a climbing perspective, it wasn't,
No, and a lot of people were saying about Nims that, this is sort of groundbreaking and put it up there with, say, Messner doing his 14... first person to do the 14 8,000 metre peaks. But then I think Stephen Venables summed it up relatively well by saying, no, I don't think this is a chapter in climbing history. It's a footnote. Which is not putting it down at all, because what he did in terms of logistics and endurance and overcoming the obstacles along the way, the closure of China etc., etc. Phenomenal. And I think, again, NIMS is being super encouraging with bringing people in.
Sure.
But, yeah, one thing I just want to touch upon, and I suppose it's linked with the Explorers Web. It was Eric Phillips said that, we should not be pressured into feeling that our efforts fall short of somebody else's parameters. And I think that's a really strong sentiment in almost anything we do, not just in the realm of polar travel or mountaineering, but in life in general. That's a really strong sentiment.
Yeah, and I think it's funny, like Tarka Le Pinière was such a good team.
That's got to be the best name in the world.
It's a cool
It's
name.
even better than my one.
It's a really cool name, yeah. I did meet years ago a guy, I think it was at SBS, called Ski Sharp. I was like, oh, damn it.
No, he must have changed that name. No one's called Ski Sharp.
Ski Sharp, that was it, that was what he introduced me. Where was I going with this? Oh, Tarka was awesome because he is... he's incredibly private. Like he's not on social media. He hates doing stuff from the media. He's got no interest in any sort of fame or celebrity or kind of public recognition at all. But he had this incredible kind of internal. Like he pushed himself really hard, and he sort of holds himself to really high standards. And I think when I went down there in 2013, like part of me was still secretly hoping, like, oh, this is gonna be the trip that makes me famous. I was still like wanting this kind of some sort of recognition. And Tarka was such a great influence on me, thinking he kind of saying, look, we're doing something that no one else has any appreciation of what this is like, really. Maybe a handful of people in the world can understand what this actually takes, like not just to do it, but just the logistics and the complexity and the fundraising, all this sort of stuff. I can't remember his line he said to me, but it was something about sort of doing it for yourself rather than for the applause. And he was a really good influence on me, and he's quite a philosophical chap. And I think at some point, like my own idea of what success meant or looked like kind of started to evolve. And I think early on in my 20s, my first few expeditions, that there was a lot of ego involved, and a lot of wanting to like prove myself and prove that I was better than other people and I could do it and they couldn't. And I've totally mellowed it. Maybe I'm just getting old.
Well, there is that brilliant book. I forget what the author. Ego is the Enemy.
Yeah, Ryan Holiday.
Yeah, I mean it's a fantastic book. Now we got to bring this ship home at some stage. So what's next?
Good question. Yeah, I feel in some ways like I've kind of scratched the itch when it comes to doing big expeditions for myself. I've got no, at the moment anyway, this might change, I don't know, but I've got no interest in putting my sledge harness on again and trying to set another record or do another first. I'm much more interested in I think my big, and maybe this is, we're talking about technology, like part of me is getting really wound up at the moment by kind of social media and this idea of like producing content and the way that to me, like expeditions, these sort of big challenging, there's always been a sort of drama and romance and tragedy and a kind of beauty to these big trips, and I just feel it's being slightly hollowed out by turning it into content, and I'm really interested in kind of storytelling and thinking back, like I was inspired by reading, hearing about stories of expeditions when I was a kid and a teenager. And so I think for me, the next chapter is about storytelling. And one of the things I'm working on is taking a group of people to Antarctica with the focus being to tell stories, so through film and art and photography and writing, poetry, whatever, and to put together a team, probably 10, 12 people, and it'd be 5 or 6 young people, late teens, early 20s, possibly students, with different areas of expertise, so like young scientist, young filmmaker, young writer, young artist, and then match them with amazing mentors, and sort of take this group down there, even if it's just for a couple of weeks, somewhere interesting, somewhere quite remote, and see what they make of it. So that's the sort of expedition I want to do in the future.
Well, I think it's really, because I think it was Ted, from the TED Talks, called you a master storyteller. And then when you appeared on Desert Island Disc, your luxury items were pen and paper.
Forgot that. Yeah.
So I think that brings it in.
Yeah. I am still trying to write my book. That's happening. So that's the next challenge. Finish my book.
That's the next challenge. Well, listen, Ben. I've always been somewhat in awe of what you do.
Well, feelings mutual.
It's fantastic to have you in with the Barn Theatre for us today. Again, a lot. I think we all agree that segued beautifully from Martin last week, talking about his work in the Arctic Ocean. And of course, Ben, if you don't know, Ben and Martin have worked very closely together. So, check out Ben's website. It is bensaunders.com.
That's it.
You will see a lot of Martin's work there. You'll probably see even more of Ben on Martin's website, martinhartley.com, so worth checking that out. But from us at the Barn Theatre, thank you once again for joining us. So much I didn't have time to talk to Ben. I wanted to talk to you about your training, because I know you're an animal when it comes to training. We both hold Mark Twight in high esteem when it comes to training and approach to things. So much to do. So I know you kind of shy away a little bit from it, but hit Ben up on social media if you want to know a little bit more about him, or if you want to join him on his master storytelling expeditions down to Antarctica. Perhaps don't listen to him if you think there's going to be a pole at the North Pole, though. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you for joining us tonight on Cool Conversations. Once again, thank you for the legend that is Ben Saunders. Don't forget why we're doing this. All our content is free, and it will remain free for your enjoyment. But we are here, of course, SOB, Save Our Barn. If you do have the inclination, reach behind the sofa right now. £1, £10, 50p. It all goes to the fantastic cause of trying to keep this community-focused theatre open. So anything is greatly, greatly appreciated from the heart. We will be back next week, as always, same time, same place. Cool Conversations next Thursday. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Ben.